Okay, everyone. One more concern I have about cost over revenue as an indicator. I call it volatility, and you'll see what I mean as we go through this video. In columns A through D of this new tab of the spreadsheet, you see exactly the same data we've been playing with for the past video or so. You got the cost of each subject code, the revenue for each subject code, and then the division of those two things. But the new column, F, is kind of fun. I call it marginal cost over revenue. And it answers the question, what would happen to the cost over revenue calculation if we add a student into the set of courses? Now, here's the assumptions I made. Number one, the student I'm going to add in is a full-time student, 12 credits a term, 3 terms, so 36 credits, and they're taking that at the in-district rate of $109. I think that's our current tuition, $109. That's assumption number one. Number two, it would not increase the cost of the program. If you're adding 1 or 2 or 3 students into your set of courses, I would think that would not increase your costs at all. If you have, like, for example, if I have 35 students in my math class and I add a 36th, that's just one more kiddo. So cost is going to stay the same, and revenue is going to be increased by approximately $3,600 for each additional student. Now, what you're going to notice is I'm going to go ahead and add a kid to each set of courses. Okay, here we go. So I just added 1 student to all the sets of courses. Now, you noticed that all the cost revenue numbers went down, and that hopefully makes perfect sense. If you have a fraction and you make the denominator bigger, that's going to make the fraction smaller. But more interesting, if you look at the 2 pie charts here, before we added that student, there were 12 flagged and 17 unflagged CTE courses. When I added a student, that went from 11 to 18. What happened? Well, if you look over at the data, look at FW. And again, for the life of me, I cannot remember what FW stands for. But its C over R value went from 2.28, which tripped the benchmark, to 1.76, which doesn't trip the benchmark. And I find that interesting. 1 student is the difference between tripping and not tripping the benchmark. So that got me thinking, what would happen if we add, let's add 2 students. And then somebody else. Who is it this time? Who else? Oh, there it is. Farm Tech went from 2.26 to 1.97. Now they don't trip. Let's keep going. Let's add a third. Okay, we just lost 2. HS, Human Services, went from 2.4 to 2.01. And what was the other one? We missed another one. We already got FW. Farm Tech. We got, oh, here we go. Wildland Fire went from 3.71 to 1.76. Whoa, that's a huge drop. How can you go from 3.71 to 1.76? And that's my third concern. When I said volatility, you're seeing it right now. As I add students to these sets of courses, you see how much the numbers are changing? They're changing quite a bit because all in-district students across the college pay $109 a credit. But $109 is worth a lot more to the total revenue of a small program than it is to a large program. You may have noticed the aviation number up there has not changed from 0.1. I mean, it has, but it's such a small difference that it doesn't even register to 2 decimals. Meanwhile, Wildland Fire has effectively cut itself in half by adding 4 students to its set of courses. And if you keep going, you begin to notice that every time you add a student, you're dropping programs off of this threshold trip. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about. Now, it takes a little bit longer to get certain ones to drop off, of course. It does. But the math I did, I think I figured out if you add 19 total students, which, again, that's a lot of students. Adding 19 students into each of these sets of courses, so, 19 times whatever, 29, what is that, 20 times 30, so 600 students, which is a lot of students, granted. That would remove everybody from the threshold. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm really talking about is the fact that even one extra student bops programs off of the threshold trip. Does that seem right? That doesn't seem right to me. It's a function of the size of the department, and here's my third concern. Small sets of courses are always the ones that tend to get hammered by this. And they have a harder time ever making this measure happy because a change of one student in a small program is a huge percentage drop compared to a change of one student in a very large department. And CTE and transfer have very similar issues in this. We've got small programs in transfer, just like we have small programs in CTE. Let's add a student. So currently 14 are flagged out of a group of 46. Let's add a student to each set of, well, look at that. Look at that. Almost half of the ones that were flagged by adding one student to their sets of courses become unflagged. Theater arts was one. Philosophy was one. GS, that's general science. Journalism, is that J? I think it is. You can scroll down here and look at the rest of them. MS, is that music? I think that's music. And down here, I can't pronounce that word, so I'm not even gonna try to do it. And then you can see what happens as you keep adding students into these sets of courses. You begin to get more and more programs dropping off. But that's my problem with the volatility of this measure. It's unfairly targeting small sets of courses, causing them to trip that benchmark threshold only because they're small. Not because they're expensive, but because they're small. So if we're actually looking at expense, then let's look at expense. So in kind of conclusion in these videos, my three concerns are pretty simple. The measure we currently use doesn't involve dollars. If we're actually trying to see where money is outgoing in large amounts, we're not going to see it with this measure. And the third concern is that we are unfairly targeting smaller sets of courses. Not because they're expensive to the college, they're expensive compared to themselves. And one more thing to think about moving forward. The thresholds that we're comparing these measures to need to be well thought out and tied to something budgetary in the college. They can't just be created out of thin air. They need to be fiscally tied. So that's my thoughts on cost over revenue. We'll attack the other ones next.